The story of the Kinahan organized crime group does not begin in the rain-slicked streets of Dublin, but in the blinding white heat of the Persian Gulf. It begins in a place where money renders morality irrelevant, Dubai. Standing on a man-made island, the Burj Al Arab is an architectural marvel designed to look like a billowing spinnaker sail. It is often cited as the world's only 7-star hotel, a rating that does not officially exist. But when you step inside to see aquariums wrapped around restaurants and helipads that double as tennis courts for legends like Roger Federer and Andre Agassi, the hyperbole feels earned. In May 2017, this cathedral of excess hosted a congregation that would change the face of global crime. The occasion was the wedding of Daniel Kinahan and Kinahan Robinson. Kinahan, approaching his 40th birthday, was a man of sharp contrasts, short, stocky, with thinning hair and eyes that portrayed a cold, calculating intelligence. His bride, Robinson, was a vision of manufactured perfection, with bottle blonde hair and a smile that dazzled under the ballroom's massive chandeliers. The speeches that night likely omitted the darker chapters of their history, such as the fact that Robinson's previous partner, Michael Kelly, had been executed in Dublin 6 years prior, shot 14 times, and run over by a car for good measure. But the true significance of this event was not the nuptials, it was the guest list. To the casual observer, the room was filled with family, friends and business associates. Among them was heavyweight champion Tyson Fury, whose attendance was briefly broadcast to the world via a tweet before being hastily deleted. Yet, beneath the veneer of a high society wedding, something far more sinister was taking place. This was not merely a marriage of two people. It was a merger of empires. Sitting at the tables, sipping champagne paid for by blood money, were the kings of the global narcotics trade. There was Ridouan Taghi, the Moroccan-Dutch warlord, whose name terrified the rebel Iskordon of 888, Netherlands, a man linked to a string of liquidations so brutal they shocked a nation. There was Edin Gatanin, the elusive head of the Tito and Dino cartel, controlling the Balkan route. There was Ricardo El Rico, Riquelme Veiga, the Chilean logistical genius, and Raffaele Imperiale, a sophisticated Italian tied to the Neapolitan Camorra, notorious for hoarding stolen Van Gogh masterpieces in his parents' basement. When this many high-value targets gather in one room, they create a gravity well that law enforcement cannot ignore. Unbeknownst to the revelers, the festivities were being watched. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, had managed to place a confidential source inside the ballroom. This brave informant did more than just watch. They mapped the room. They drew a diagram of who was sitting with whom, secretly filming the interactions that confirmed a terrifying reality. These men were not just coexisting in Dubai, they were collaborating, they were pooling their resources, money, logistics and violence to create a frictionless pipeline of cocaine from South America into the heart of Europe. The intelligence gathered that night was explosive. The DEA shared their findings globally, and the European press soon coined a name for this alliance: the Super Cartel. Europol analysts later estimated that this specific network, cemented over wedding cake and crystal glasses, controlled 1/3 of the entire European cocaine market, a business worth approximately $20 billion annually. The Irish police, Angada Síochána, would later value the Kinahan family's personal war chest at roughly $1 billion. In the gilded cage of the Burj Al Arab, they felt untouchable, masters of a universe where sovereign laws did not apply. But hubris is a dangerous drug. By gathering in the light, they had inadvertently given their enemies the roadmap to destroy them. To understand how a Dublin criminal ends up holding court in a 7-star hotel, one must look away from the gold leaf of Dubai and peer into the damp, vermin-infested cells of Portlaoise prison. The year was 1997, 2 decades before the grand wedding, and Christy Kinahan Senior was a resident of the notorious E-Wing. It was a fortress of Victorian misery, where inmates still slopped out, using buckets for toilets in cells they occupied alone. It was here, in this incubator of resentment, that the modern cartel was intellectually conceived. Christy Senior was never a typical gangster. Born into a respectable middle-class home, his entry into the underworld was not driven by desperation, but by a twisted sort of ambition. He began with check fraud, displaying a talent for manipulation early on. He was dapper, well-dressed, and possessed the chameleon-like ability to adopt a refined Anglo-Irish accent when the situation demanded it. In a world of nicknames like the Penguin and the Viper, he earned the moniker the Dapper Don. He was a con man at heart, but he had the soul of a CEO. By the late 1970s, heroin was tearing through Dublin's inner city like a plague. When the city's first major importer, Larry Dunn, was jailed in 1985, a vacuum opened in the market. Kinahan Senior stepped into the void. His activities soon caught the eye of a young, sharp detective named Michael O'Sullivan. O'Sullivan noticed something peculiar. Unlike the other players in the heroin trade who often dipped into their own supply, Kinahan was clean. He was not an addict. He was an operator. He ran his logistics with a cold, corporate efficiency that unnerved the police. When O'Sullivan finally caught him in 1986, posing as an electrician to surveil the target, the arrest revealed the scope of Kinahan's vision. Police found a significant stash of heroin, yes, but they also found language tapes. While other criminals were learning how to hotwire cars or intimidate witnesses, Christy Kinahan was teaching himself French and Russian. He was already looking past the local streets, envisioning a game played on a continental board. Prison did not break him. It refined him. David MacDonald, a prison officer on the E-Wing, recalled Kinahan as an anomaly. The 40-year-old inmate kept his shirt buttons crisp and his interactions minimal. He avoided the yard politics, the drug smuggling, and the petty violence. If a fight broke out, Kinahan was already in his cell, door closed. He became a jailhouse consultant, advising other inmates on legal loopholes with the expertise of a barrister, despite having no formal training. But his real work was academic. He treated his sentence not as a punishment, but as a sabbatical. He enrolled in open university courses, studying Spanish, Russian, and Dutch, with a monastic discipline. Officer MacDonald was the one who delivered his textbooks, watching a man prepare for a future that no one else could see. The extent of his focus was revealed in 2001 when he was offered early release for good behavior. In a move that stunned the prison administration, Kinahan declined. He had 2 months left on a course, and felt the chaotic environment of the outside world would disrupt his studies. He chose to stay in his cage to finish his degree. Detective O'Sullivan would later describe him as a strategic mercenary, a man who learned from every mistake and never let emotion cloud a business decision. Kinahan realized that the chaos of the Dublin streets attracted too much heat. The newly formed Criminal Assets Bureau CAB was seizing property left and right, fueled by public outrage over the murder of journalist Veronica Guerin. Ireland was becoming too small for a man of his ambition. Upon his release, he did not return to the corners of Dublin. He took his degrees, his languages, and his grey man philosophy, and boarded a plane to the continent. The Dapper Don was done with retail. He was moving into wholesale. The destination for Christy Kinahan's new life was Spain's Costa del Sol, a sun-drenched stretch of coastline that had earned a more cynical nickname among law enforcement, the Costa del Crime. It was the early 2000s, and this region had become a Star Wars cantina of international villainy. Here, British bank robbers rubbed shoulders with Russian oligarchs, Moroccan hashish smugglers, and Italian mafiosi. It was a neutral ground, where alliances were forged over sangria, and business was conducted, far from the prying eyes of home. Kinahan Senior wasted no time integrating. He leveraged his linguistic skills, and his prison-honed diplomatic abilities to forge connections with Colombian and Mexican cartels, looking for a tin European foothold. But he did not come alone. He brought his 2 sons, Daniel and Christopher Jr., into the family business. They had grown up in the Oliver Bond flats in Dublin, raised by their mother, Jean, who had tried to shield them from their father's world, but the gravitational pull of their father's lifestyle was too strong. The brothers were a study in duality. Christopher Jr. was quiet, polite, and groomed for the cerebral side of the operation, money laundering, and corporate structuring. Daniel, however, was different. Retired Detective Inspector Noel Brown, who watched Daniel's rise, described him as a peacock. While his father was the grey man who blended into the background, Daniel craved the spotlight. He was arrogant, flashy, and wore his inherited status like a crown. He surrounded himself with thugs and dressed in the latest designer fashion, desperate to prove he was not just the boss's son, but a boss in his own right. This insecurity manifested in aggression. In 2004, British police got a preview of Daniel's temperament. When a betting syndicate he was involved with lost money after a jockey, Kieran Fallon, won a race he was supposedly meant to lose, Daniel did not cut his losses. He flew to England with a hit team to confront the jockey at his home. The mission was only aborted because they spotted an unmarked police car tailing them. It was a reckless, amateurish move that his father likely would have despised, but it signaled a dangerous shift in the organization's DNA. As the 2000s progressed, the market shifted. Heroin, the drug of the desperate, was out. Cocaine, the drug of the affluent, was in. The European economy was booming, and snow was falling in every nightclub from Ibiza to Berlin. The Kinahans positioned themselves perfectly to ride this white wave. To handle the scale of their new operation, they professionalized. Spanish police wiretaps revealed that the gang was not just hiring muscle, they were training soldiers. Members received instruction in anti-surveillance, hostage handling, and martial arts. They were turning street thugs into operatives. However, success brings scrutiny. In 2010, a massive multi-agency investigation known as Operation Shovel culminated in dawn raids across Spain, Ireland, and the UK armed police smashed through the doors of the Kinahan villas. Christy Senior, ever the gentleman, politely told the officers they could have just rung the doorbell. The raids were meant to be the death blow, seizing properties and freezing hundreds of bank accounts. Authorities declared victory, believing they had dismantled the network. They were wrong. The evidence for drug trafficking did not stick. The core leadership, after a brief stint in custody, walked free. But the operation did have one unintended, catastrophic consequence: it accelerated the succession. Christy Senior, facing money laundering charges in Belgium, had to step back. The baton was passed to Daniel. The strategic mercenary was replaced by the volatile peacock. Under Daniel's leadership, the caution that had protected the family for decades began to erode. He expanded aggressively, built the super cartel alliances, and seemingly forgot the golden rule of the Costa del Sol. Keep your head down. The Dapper Don had built an empire on silence. His son was about to tear it apart with noise. The transition from a business empire to a warring faction began with a breach of trust. For years, the Kinahans had maintained a functional alliance with the Hutch family, a legendary Dublin crime syndicate led by Jerry the Monk Hutch. But in the paranoid ecosystem of the Costa del Sol, alliances are fragile. The Kinahans began to suspect that Gary Hutch, the monk's nephew, who was working within their organization in Spain, was leaking information to the police. The situation spiraled. In an attempt to save his nephew, the monk personally negotiated a peace deal. He agreed to pay the Kinahans €200,000 as penance for Gary's perceived transgressions. The blood money was accepted, hands were shaken, and assurances were given. But Daniel Kinahan's word, unlike his father's, proved worthless. In September 2015, Gary Hutch was chased around a swimming pool in Marbella and executed. The message was clear: no one steals from the Kinahans, and no amount of money buys forgiveness. It was a tactical error, born of arrogance. Daniel underestimated the Hutches, mistaking their silence for submission. He did not realize that by breaking the truce, he'd initiated a war that would bring Mexican cartel tactics to the streets of Dublin. The response came on February 5, 2016. The setting was the Regency Hotel in Dublin, hosting a weigh-in for a boxing match, a seemingly safe space for Daniel, surrounded by his entourage and the sport he loved. But the sanctity of the ring was shattered when a hit team stormed the building. Two of the gunmen were dressed in authentic-looking Garda police, Iru tactical gear, armed with AK-47 assault rifles. The third, Kevin Murray, known as Flat Cap, made no attempt to hide his face as he moved through the crowd with a handgun. The chaos was absolute. The crack of automatic gunfire echoed off the hotel tiles, sending parents and children scrambling for cover. It was a scene ripped from a Narcos script, played out in a Dublin suburb on a Friday afternoon. The primary target was Daniel Kinahan. In the confusion, Daniel managed to escape through a window, fleeing for his life. However, his loyal lieutenant, David Byrne, was not so lucky. He was gunned down in the lobby, his body left as a gruesome calling card. The Regency attack was a humiliation for Daniel. The Untouchable Kingpin had been made to run. His response was immediate and apocalyptic. Driven by a blinding fury that superseded all business logic, Daniel unleashed a wave of violence that Dublin had never seen. He did not just want revenge. He wanted extermination. 3 days after the hotel attack, Eddie Hutch, Jerry's brother and a taxi driver, with no involvement in organized crime, was shot dead in his hallway. It was the opening salvo of a purge. Over the next 2 years, the Kinahan hit squads hunted down anyone connected to the Hutch name. Associates, friends and family members were targeted with ruthless efficiency. The violence was indiscriminate. In August 2016, Trevor O'Neill, a Dublin City Council worker on vacation in Majorca, was shot dead in front of his family, simply because he resembled a Hutch associate. The body count rose to 18. This was no longer a gang turf war, it was a slaughter. But while Daniel felt he was asserting dominance, he was actually digging his own grave. The Dapper Don's strategy of operating in the shadows was obliterated by the muzzle flashes of AK-47s. The sheer brutality of the feud forced the Irish state to react with unprecedented force. The public demanded action, and the Gardaí responded, dedicating massive resources to dismantling the network. Daniel had won the battle for the streets, but in doing so, he had invited the full weight of international law enforcement to his door. He had traded the safety of anonymity for the bloody satisfaction of revenge. While the streets of Dublin were being washed clean of blood, Daniel Kinahan was busy polishing a different kind of reputation in the glare of the spotlight. He had long harbored a fascination with professional boxing, seeing it not just as a hobby, but as a vehicle for legitimacy. If the drug trade was the engine of his wealth, boxing would be the paint job that made it look respectable. This strategy is known in geopolitical circles as sportswashing, using the glamour of high-level athletics to sanitize a toxic reputation. In 2012, Daniel co-founded a gym in Marbella with middleweight boxer Matthew Macklin. Originally called MGM, it was later rebranded as MTK Global Mac the Knife. To the boxers, Daniel was not a drug lord, he was a savior. He was the generous benefactor who paid better than any rival promoter, housed fighters in luxury villas in Spain and Dubai, and treated them like royalty. He bought loyalty with the same currency he used to buy cocaine, endless, unaccountable cash. The jewel in his crown was Tyson Fury. The chaotic, charismatic heavyweight champion was the perfect frontman for Daniel's ambitions. In the world of boxing, where morality is often flexible, Daniel's background was waved away as street credibility. When Fury returned from a hiatus marked by depression and substance abuse, it was Daniel who guided his comeback. This relationship culminated in a surreal moment in 2020. Tyson Fury posted a video to social media, excitedly announcing a 2-fight deal with Anthony Joshua for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. In the video, Fury explicitly thanked Daniel Kinahan 3 times for getting the deal over the line. Big shout out to Dan. He beamed. For the public, it was just a boxer thanking his manager. For law enforcement and victims of the cartel, it was a sickening display of impunity. Here was the man responsible for the Regency-era slaughter, the man whose organization was flooding Europe with misery, being hailed as a hero by one of the most famous athletes on the planet. It was a tipping point. Investigator Chris Urban later recalled the shock within the DEA and European police forces. They watched in disbelief as mainstream sports broadcasters and promoters engaged with Daniel as if he were a legitimate businessman. Bob Arum's top-ranked promotion company even entered into consultancy deals involving Kinahan, with Arum admitting he admired Daniel's honorable nature in negotiations. The cartel had successfully integrated itself into the fabric of a multi-billion-dollar legitimate industry. But this visibility was a double-edged sword. Daniel's ego demanded credit. He wanted to be known as the kingmaker of boxing, the man who made the biggest fights happen. He attended meetings in Dubai hotels with no visible security, negotiating million-dollar purses on WhatsApp, projecting the image of a corporate mogul. He failed to realize that by stepping into the ring's light, he was making himself a fixed target. The boxing world's embrace of Kinahan highlighted a disturbing reality. As long as the money is green, nobody asks where it comes from. The sport provided the perfect cover for money laundering. Purses could be inflated, ticket sales manipulated, and fighters paid in cryptocurrency, a favorite tool of the cartel. It was a brilliant scheme, fusing the underworld with the upper echelons of entertainment. But the Thank You Dan video had alerted a sleeping giant. The US government was watching, and they did not care about heavyweight belts. They saw a narco-terrorist using American commerce to clean his money, and they were about to ring the final bell. While Daniel Kinahan was basking in the glow of heavyweight accolades, a silent catastrophe was unfolding in the servers of a data center in Roubaix, France. For years, Europe's top criminals had communicated on specialized encrypted phone networks EncroChat and Sky ECC. These devices, costing thousands of euros, were marketed as unhackable, stripped of microphones and GPS, designed solely for secure messaging. The cartel leaders believed they were speaking in a soundproof room. In reality, French and Dutch police had not only broken the door down, they were sitting at the table, reading every word in real time. The hack was a revelation. It provided an unprecedented X-ray of the underworld. Investigators watched as the super cartel managed multi-ton cocaine shipments with the casual ease of a corporate logistics team. They saw photos of bricks of cocaine stamped with brand logos, discussions about bribes and orders for murders. Interestingly, Daniel himself was ghost-like on these networks. Paranoia had served him well. He did not carry an EncroPhone. Instead, his lieutenants, like Sean McGovern using the handle knife, acted as human conduits, relaying messages from the big guy or chess. But even this buffer was not enough. The sheer volume of data triangulated the leadership's location and intent. The dominoes began to fall. Raffaele Imperiale, the cartel's Italian partner, was arrested in Dubai in 2021 based on this digital evidence. Facing a lifetime in an Italian cell, the man who once hoarded Van Goghs made a calculated decision. He turned Pentito State's witness. From a heavy security prison near Rome, he began to sing, filling thousands of pages with testimony that stripped the Kinahan operation naked. He described the super cartel not as a monolith, but as a confederation of investors, ruthless, competitive, yet codependent. The final, crushing blow came from a direction the Kinahans had arrogantly ignored: the United States government. On April 12, 2022, the atmosphere in Dublin City Hall was electric. The US ambassador to Ireland, Claire Cronin, took the podium and dropped a geopolitical bomb. She announced that the US Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control OFAC was sanctioning the Kinahan organized crime group. They were placed in the same tier as the Camorra, the Yakuza, and Los Zetas. The sanctions were financially nuclear. Any assets held in US dollars or touching the US banking system were frozen. Credit cards stopped working. Business partners vanished. But the masterstroke was the bounty, a $5 million reward for information leading to the arrest of Christy Senior. Daniel, or Christopher Jr. Overnight, the Kinahans went from celebrity gangsters to global pariahs. The boxing world, which had so eagerly embraced Daniel's money, suddenly suffered a collective bout of amnesia. MTK Global ceased operations. Probellum, another company linked to the network, folded shortly after. The sports washing project had failed spectacularly. The sanctions did what years of police work could not. They made the Kinahans radioactive. In the deserts of Dubai, the family found their world shrinking. The luxury cars and 7-star hotels remained, but the walls of their golden cage were closing in. They were no longer just criminals, they were enemies of the United States dollar. In the aftermath of the sanctions, one might expect the Kinahans to go underground, to vanish into the smoke and mirrors they had used so effectively in the past. Instead, the family's discipline began to fracture in bizarre and revealing ways. Christy Kinahan Senior, the Dapper Don, who had once prided himself on being a ghost, began leaving a digital trail that baffled intelligence analysts. Bellingcat investigators discovered that the elder Kinahan had been posting hundreds of reviews on Google Maps under the alias Christopher Vincent. It was a surreal glimpse into the banality of evil. The man wanted for running $1 billion narco-terrorist empire was busy rating cafes in Zimbabwe and fishing trips in the UAE. He critiqued the presentation of eggs with almond bread and boasted about catching a cartload of fish. It was a display of breathtaking arrogance, or perhaps senility. He was signaling that he was still traveling, still living the high life, seemingly unbothered by the $5 million price on his head. But the reality on the ground was far less relaxed. The sanctions had placed immense pressure on the United Arab Emirates. The UAE, desperate to get off the international grey list for money laundering, could no longer afford to shelter such high-profile fugitives. The protective shield of Dubai was cracking. In October 2024, Sean McGovern, Daniel's right-hand man, and the knife of the EncroChat logs, was arrested at his Dubai home. He had not expected it. For years, Dubai had been a sanctuary, where murder charges from Europe were ignored. Now he was extradited to Ireland to face trial. The precedent was terrifying for the Kinahans. If McGovern could be touched, so could they. Despite the tightening noose, the machine kept running. In September 2023, Irish Army Rangers stormed the MV Matthew, a freighter off the coast of Cork. They found over 2 tons of cocaine, the largest seizure in the state's history. The operation was traced back to the Kinahans, proving that even under sanctions, they were still flooding Europe with drugs. Detective Michael O'Sullivan's words rang true. A leopard does not change its spots. They knew no other way to exist. Today, the Kinahan Cartel exists in a state of suspended animation. They are trapped in Dubai, unable to leave for fear of arrest, yet unsure how long their hosts will tolerate them. The investigation files in Dublin are ready. The US DEA is watching. The money is harder to move. The empire is crumbling not with a bang, but with a slow, suffocating squeeze. Yet, the lineage persists. In May 2024, at the heavyweight title fight between Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk in Riyadh, a reporter spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was not Daniel, he was too hot to attend. It was his son, Cian Kinahan, sitting a few rows back, wearing a black t-shirt and beaming at the violence in the ring. The Dapper Don had passed the torch to the peacock, and now a third generation watched from the wings. The story of the Kinahan Cartel may be nearing its final chapter, or perhaps, in the endless cycle of the underworld, it is simply waiting for the new author to pick up the pen.